the newsagents.
You know, the biggest threat is not global warming, where the ocean's going to rise one-eighth of an inch over the next 400 years. And you'll have more oceanfront property, right? The biggest threat is not that. The biggest threat is nuclear warming.
You are the path to prosperity, and I think Kamala is the opposite. Then that's my honest opinion. I'm gonna get attacked like crazy, and I've also experienced quite a bit of lawfare myself. But I'm just trying to tell people my honest opinion, and I haven't been really active in politics before, and I'm just trying to point out that my track record historically has been moderate, if not moderate, slightly left. And so this is to people out there who are in the moderate camp to say, I think you should support Donald Trump for president.
Those were the voices of perhaps the two biggest figures on the modern American right, perhaps even hard right. Donald Trump, of course, but also Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla and, of course, X, hosting a odd, rambling conversation between the two men last night where Elon, despite saying that he'd previously been on the left, gave Trump his endorsement for the election.
Donald Trump loves anyone who endorses him, full stop. But this is someone with considerable power, huge amounts of money, and a platform which is probably one of the biggest social media platforms there is in the world. But will it make a difference? Is this going to change the race? A race that has already changed with Joe Biden's withdrawal and Kamala Harris's ascension. Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Lewis.
And today's episode is going to have a distinctly American theme because later in the pod, we sit down and talk to the former speaker, one of the most formidable women in American politics, Nancy Pelosi. And she is absolutely fascinating on Joe Biden, on Liz Truss, got to listen out for that, on Nancy Pelosi herself and the role she's played in US politics. That's a little bit later on.
Yeah, but first we're going to talk about a much anticipated, at least in Elon Musk world and X world, conversation which took place between Elon Musk, now of course the owner of what used to be Twitter, now X, and Donald Trump. And this is the kind of climax of a bromance between these two people that has been developing over the past couple of years. Musk, having said he voted for Biden back in 2020, has endorsed Trump. And this was a conversation that they had on X, which didn't get off to the kind of strongest start, much like the sort of ill-fated, you might remember, the ill-fated kind of launch of Ron DeSantis' campaign, the Florida governor, for when he was running for the Republican nomination for president. It didn't go wrong. Musk claimed that the site had been hacked, even though X seemed to be running perfectly fine everywhere else. But they had this long, as you might imagine, rambling conversation between the two men, which was basically a kind of mutual loving. Right? Trump was complimenting Musk endlessly about his business prowess, his corporate prowess, everything that he'd done with X and Twitter. And likewise, Musk was saying that Trump was the path for America back to prosperity.
Yeah, it was simultaneously, I can't bear to watch, I can't bear to listen.
What was that? Okay.
Do you want me to spell that for you?
I think we might be here for some time. It would have a hell of a Scrabble score.
No, it would need a few Z's and X's to get the Scrabble score up really high. It was alternately just revolting and repulsive and sort of at times strangely compelling. Trump starts talking about, Kim Jong-un and some of the things that you don't want to know what he did in North Korea, that he told me about. And you just think, oh my God, this is ridiculous. And, and recounting supposedly his conversation with Vladimir Putin, which sounded like two teenagers in a playground arguing. The clip of it is very funny. But it also has Elon Musk apparently applying for a job if Donald Trump wins the next election, and Donald Trump going back to his apprentice days and saying, you're hired. I mean, have a listen to this.
I think it would be great to just have a government efficiency commission that takes a look at these things and just ensures that the taxpayer money, the taxpayers' hard-earned money, is spent in a good way. And I'd be happy to help out on such a commission.
I'd love it
if it were formed.
Well, you're the greatest cutter. I look at what you do. You walk in and you just say, You want to quit? They go on
Yeah.
strike. I won't mention the name of the company, but they go on strike, and you say, that's okay, you're all gone.
So what Donald Trump loves about Elon Musk is that if workers take industrial action, he fires them. I tell you the other thing that I realised, I'd never heard Donald Trump laugh before. And he laughs in that. I've seen him smile and smirk and grimace. I'd never heard him laugh before. And that was the first time I'd heard him laugh. But look, you've got to put a bit of context into Elon Musk suddenly finding this Damascene conversion to all things Donald Trump, having backed Biden, having been a lifelong Democrat, having then backed Ron DeSantis, and now alights on Donald Trump. One, what billionaire doesn't want to be close to someone who may be holding the reins of power? But two, one of Donald Trump's key proposals, economic proposals, is to put 100% tariff on EVs, electric cars, coming in from China. Well, I wonder who might benefit from 100% tariff on electric vehicles. It's Elon Musk with Tesla. And so you can see that there is a bit of mutual self-interest there. Donald Trump gets the backing of someone who controls that platform and does control it and, is going to lend his support. And Elon Musk probably gets a very beneficial business arrangement for Tesla.
Yeah, and look, there has been a lot written recently about the transition for lots of Silicon Valley types, both in the actual tech itself and venture capital and elsewhere, and Musk perhaps being the best example of this, making the transition from being, back in 2016, pretty horrified by the prospect of a Trump victory, to not loads of them, but more of them being perfectly sanguine about it, if not a la Musk, actively endorsing him. And, as I say, I think lots has been written about this, loads of very thinky, pensive, and sort of analysis pieces in the New York Times, Washington Post, Financial Times. I think, Pete Buttigieg, who's the Biden transport secretary and former mayor, of course, and former presidential candidate, he summed this up really well the other day when actually he said, you can overthink this stuff a bit, right? You can overthink about the kind of libertarian nature of Silicon Valley and how that aligns with Trump and how the philosophies align, all that. Fundamentally, right, you've got a group of very rich people and very rich companies who did pretty well out of the Trump years. They did really well out of the signature and only legislative achievement, really, of the Trump presidency, which was the Trump tax cuts, which benefited a lot of rich people and a lot of wealthy companies. And ultimately, this is a bit of a dance of death between the two of them in the sense that they're both locked into a mutual embrace. They both have something to gain. And Trump has something to gain because right now, as we've been talking about, he has been struggling massively to counter or find a point of critique to the Harris campaign. He is deeply, deeply annoyed by the amount of free media that she is receiving as a new candidate, which is a domain in which he normally excels. And so he's trying to find some way of feeling relevant, getting back into the game. And Twitter, another arena in which he used to previously excel, if that is the right word, offers an opportunity to do that. Hence this weird 2-hour conversation with Musk, and hence he's returning to the platform and starting to tweet in the last 24 hours in a way that we haven't seen really since January the 6th.
I hate using the word triggered, but I suddenly saw on my phone alerts saying that Donald Trump had tweeted or X'd, and it just brought back 4 years of the Trump presidency where you'd wake up in the middle of the night to check your phone to see if Donald Trump had tweeted, because normally his most outrageous and therefore most newsworthy tweets would come in the middle of the night where he'd say, right, we're not going to have any trans people in the US military. And you think, oh my God, that's a big story. We're going to have to chase that up when I wake up in the morning. And suddenly there he is back on my phone again with Donald Trump has just tweeted. I think what's important about that is that Donald Trump, after January the 6th and being kicked off Twitter, this is in the pre-Elon Musk days, he set up Truth Social, which was his own social media platform. And the fact of the matter is that Truth Social does not get anything like the purchase for him. It might get 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 likes, but nothing like as many people are on Truth Social as they are on X. And so Donald Trump, if he's able to leverage the 193 million supporters that Elon Musk has, plus the millions and millions of people who follow Donald Trump on X, then you're in a much better place. Now, the question I have is, does it make that much difference to the race? Of course, you'd rather have Elon Musk in your camp than outside of it, but is it a game changer?
Indeed. And Musk has sort of responded to the accusations of his being biased in favor of Trump and so on, to saying that he would happily have Kamala Harris on a similar kind of conversation anytime she'd like. Of course, the difference is that not only has Musk, as we heard there, actively endorsed Trump, but he's also done something else, which is very different to the period that Trump was last on Twitter and last used it to such political effect, right? Which is that he, as we know, Musk, has recalibrated the way the entire website works to basically promote the sort of views and pro-Trump voices that are advantageous to him, to Trump. And we've seen this sort of happen little by little. Even small changes that have been relatively unnoticed, right? So not long ago, Musk changed the like function on Twitter, on X. So you could no longer see who had liked tweets. Like if you go onto an account, if you go onto John Sopel's account, instead of seeing all of the sort of attempts that he had to try and get sort of free air miles by liking lots of different sort of airlines over the years and so on, you can no longer see that from John Sopel anymore, unfortunately. You can't see all of that. And so the net consequence of that is, as well as not being as interesting as it was, is that basically you can no longer see the sheer number of bots that are often being farmed across the world, liking far-right or extremist content, or whatever the content happens to be. And so it basically makes it look like some of these views, very pro-Trump views, or whatever they happen to be, are way more popular than they actually are. And that is before you even get into all the really big changes around the algorithms, what we see on Twitter and what we don't. So it's helpful to Trump in one sense, in the sense that he's basically increasingly getting a bigger version of what he had on Truth Social, which, as you say, John, is less popular. But of course, there is a cost to all of this, which is the more changes Musk has made, the more of the sort of average person who might use it, or certainly kind of center to left or to progressive, have decided to either lessen their use of the platform or they've decided to come off altogether. So what you're seeing X and Twitter transform into, I think, slowly and perhaps increasingly quickly, is just another version of a massive echo chamber for the Musk-Trump worldview. And so then you have to ask, actually, how useful is that to him? It's quite useful in the sense it gets his megaphone out there and it gets his voice out there, but there's probably a real sense of diminishing returns in terms of its efficacy as a platform to actually get political messaging out there, which is actually ultimately will be a problem for Trump, but ultimately be a much bigger problem for Elon Musk.
And look, this love-in, which started 40 minutes late with technical gremlins, as you were saying, Lewis, lasted for 2 hours. So who would have been convinced? Who would have sat there for 2 hours listening to this rambling, meandering Donald Trump getting out his greatest hits of grievances? I won the election, it was stolen from me, etc., etc. I wonder whose mind was changed and thought at the end of that, I'm definitely now voting Trump, I'm not voting Harris. It's preaching to the choir. It's preaching to those who are already converted. And that has a merit in itself. I just don't believe that is where either campaign think the election will be won or lost.
No, and this is what I mean about Twitter and X, right? Which is that his has become increasingly, twas ever thus to some extent, but it has become increasingly even more so a place for the eccentric, for the dispossessed and the never possessed, as John Major might have once put it. People who are, if you listen to any of the Musk-Trump exchanges, the thing that I'm amazed about both of them, it shows kind of the fact they're both on another planet. Actually, it's amazing that they think that they could come across well. Basically, you've got two very, in their own way, of course, very high achieving, but also deeply eccentric, odd men talking very often about deeply eccentric, odd things, half the time sounding like they're in a slightly different universe to everybody else. And of course, the thing is about Twitter or X increasingly these days as well, is that none of them will ever notice that because they live in a kind of rarefied universe of their own where they're constantly receiving positive reinforcement from the same people and bots and kind of Uber fans. And Musk and Trump both have their own versions of this. There's a Venn diagram where they intersect, but they're also distinct and separate. They're getting positive affirmation. But as you say, John, I think the average person, insofar as they might come across any of this stuff, I find it hard to fathom or believe how they wouldn't look at the two of them and think they're just deeply odd, right? Which is actually, aligns perfectly with what the Democrat attack of late has been about both of these men insofar as they attack Musk, which is these guys are weirdos and oddballs and misfits, as Dominic Cummings might have said.
Well, we got a John Major quote in there, a Dominic Cummings quote in there.
I'm coming up to Confucius.
Yeah, exactly. Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. And thanks for your comments about my air miles. I've realised I've been wasting my time now for months and months and months. We'll be back after the break with the former House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi.
It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. I think overwhelming support of the caucus. It's not for me to say. I'm not the head of the caucus anymore, but he's beloved. He is respected, and people want him to make that decision.
That was Nancy Pelosi, seemingly being very helpful to Joe Biden, where she's saying, oh, Joe, just make up your mind whether you want to run for the presidency or not. The former Speaker of the House, one of the most formidable politicians in America, was actually saying something completely different, which was, Joe, I know you said a week ago that you're staying in this for the long haul. You need to think again. You don't have the support. She played a lethal role in getting him out of the way to make way for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, and in case you aren't familiar with Nancy Pelosi or know much of her biography, I mean, she is truly one of the great modern political power brokers of American history. As John said, she was Speaker of the House twice, both under, initially elected as Speaker back in 2006. She became the Democrat leader in 2002. She dominated American Democrat politics, congressional politics. She became the Speaker again under Trump as well back in 2018. So she had an extraordinary longevity. And there is pretty much not a central, certainly domestic American political story of the last 2 decades, certainly any great congressional accomplishment or anything, that sooner or later you will not find the work of Nancy Pelosi behind. She's been compared to LBJ, who before he was president, of course, and vice president, he was known as the master of the Senate, the kind of absolute kind of power broker extraordinaire who is the man you could go to get piece of legislation done, the great arm twisters. They have two completely different styles. LBJ much more bullish, much more aggressive. I think Pelosi very, very, very different, a sort of master of political psychology in a way. But she is a titan of American politics. There's no two ways about it.
And we are delighted that Nancy Pelosi has come on the podcast. In America, you keep the title, even though you've stopped being in that role. So she's no longer Speaker.
She's got a special title.
Yeah,
Speaker Emerita.
Speaker Emerita. So she is still to Americans Madam Speaker, and we are going with that title. So Madam Speaker, thank you very much for coming on the podcast today to talk about your book, The Art of Power, which is something that you have wielded brilliantly. But your book starts in a very personal place, and it talks about the appalling incident that happened at your home in California, where your husband was attacked by a man with a hammer. And I saw you when you were over in London at the end of April, and it was good to see Paul with you then. What did you feel when it sort of almost became a matter of jokes on social media? And didn't it just show all that was wrong with our political discourse?
Well, it was what's wrong with the former president of the United States, because most of that came from him, his family, Republican governor, other Republican leaders, Elon Musk, in fact, too, to make a joke of that. It was a horrible thing physically for my husband. It was a terrible thing. They were looking for me. My husband is not a very political person. He's a lovely gentleman. He's not a fighter the way I am. I mean, he's not in politics. But the trauma that caused for our children and our grandchildren, to see them make a joke of physical violence, of somebody going into our home, into our bedroom, was horrible. But it was countered by thousands, endless love, prayer, support, thoughtfulness from all over the world. That was so meaningful. to us.
But how do you deal with the toxicity of social media? Because, I mean, Elon Musk, for example, at the moment in Britain is allying himself with the far right anti-immigrants who, have been behind a lot of the social unrest we've seen in this country in the past 2 weeks.
The issue of immigration is fraught with disagreement, as we know. In our country, the most glowing statement on immigration, in my view, was made by Ronald Reagan. He said, "This is the last speech I will make as President of the United States." Imagine that, the last speech. "And I want to communicate a message, the country I love."
It was stated best in a letter I received not long ago. A man wrote me and said, "You can go to live in France, but you cannot become a Frenchman. You can go to live in Germany or Turkey or Japan, but you cannot become a German, a Turk, or Japanese. But anyone from any corner of the earth can come to live in America and become an American."
And he talks about the Statue of Liberty and the beacon of hope. The statue is to draw people to America, and that our preeminence in the world springs from the hope and the determination, the optimism that newcomers bring to our country. Now, for a long time, European countries had been who they are, not having that many immigrants. Now you do, and how it is dealt with has to be done with respect, with safety, with rules and the rest, and not with troublemakers like that, because the social media has changed the dynamic.
Madam Speaker, I wonder, though, whether you think that there is or might be a specific problem, not just with social media, but in particular with Elon Musk. I mean, we've seen how the changes that he's made to X, which has become Twitter, which has become such a big part of our democracies, your country, our countries, elsewhere as well. John's already alluded to the fact that it's become, in the last week, a key part of the unrest we've seen in this country. We've seen what happened in January the 6th as well. I wonder whether you think there is a particular problem with the way that Elon Musk is conducting himself and his company.
Well, Elon Musk is a very brilliant person. He's accomplished some good things. So people sort of say, well, we take the good with the bad. No, the bad is very, in my view, very evil if it's stoking this negativity. But let me enlarge the issue to social media more broadly. He has that opportunity there, but there are also others who are contributing to the problem. One thing that we're trying to do is having our Children's Protection Bill passed in the Congress of the United States. It's passing the Senate. We hope the House would take it up, but we know for sure if we win the election, the House will take it up.
Well, let's talk a bit about the election. As I say, you were in London at the end of April, and I saw you at the US Embassy in Regent's Park, and we had a brief conversation in which you said to me, 1, Joe Biden is just fine. 2, he is 100% going to be the candidate. 3, he's going to win in November. When did you change your mind?
When did he change his mind?
No, when did you? No, I think when did you change your mind on whether he could still be the candidate? Because you intervened on Morning Joe and kind of came out and said, he needs to make up his mind.
Right, I did. I said that, right. And again, with all due respect to your question, especially in light of my saying what I did, which is what I believe, that he would be our nominee. Events that followed were not about so much about him, but about the campaign that he had to put him across. Remember, my mission is that what's his name will not be president of the United States. With all due respect, I'm not having any discussion of any conversations I may have had about this. He made his decision, and his decision has led to Kamala being our nominee. And we're very proud of her.
But were you? It was such an important moment of US history, and you did say what you said on Morning Joe, which was he's got to make up his own mind, which was a week after he had said, I've made up my mind, I'm running. Was it the debate performance which made you think things aren't what they should be?
No, I mean, it's really a question of how we're going to win the election. What was the campaign that was in place to win the election? Joe Biden is the most consequential president of modern times. he has accomplished more with the work of the Democratic Congress than any president in recent history. He's remarkable. I've said he should be on Mount Rushmore. He is that. Just so, except people don't know, that's where we have. It's a term of a reference we make about somebody who's really
We understand.
especially great. Now you do. I don't know if your audience is especially.
They're very
great.
politically engaged. Don't worry.
Yeah, but you think he
Oh,
made
they
the
know
right.
Mount
But you
Rushmore.
think he made the right decision.
It's the right decision if he made it, and he did. So that's where I take it. I love him. 3 generations of our family, my husband and I, Paul and I, our children have grown up loving Joe Biden and respecting him. So with all the love, respect, and the rest, I want his legacy to prevail. I think his legacy was greatly at risk if that other guy should win. Which I make sure doesn't happen.
You have been laudatory, Madam Speaker, about President Biden's record, and you've said in many interviews that you think he's the most consequential president for many years. You also said the other day, and it was a very intriguing comment, I thought, you said you'd nonetheless never been very impressed by his political operation. What did you mean by that?
Just what I said. But again, why don't
in
we
what
just
way?
talk about Kamala Harris and how we're going to win this election rather than some concerns that I had about how one appearance could have been taken care of had there been other plans in the works, and it wasn't happening. So I don't think it was worthy of his greatness. And I'll say that. I think it wasn't worthy of his greatness.
I understand, but
I'm not going to talk any more about it. So whatever you ask, I'm going to respond in a completely different way. Perhaps tell you about our event with Kamala Harris yesterday.
It's kind of fun to have a politician on who says, "I'm now not going to answer your questions." And I like the candor of that. Can I just ask you this one? Have you spoken to him since?
No, but that was unusual. That was just 3 weeks ago. We've been friends for over 40 years, His greatness is something that will prevail in history, but we have to make sure that it is not negated by, what's his name?
I just wonder whether your grandchildren have read the Harry Potter books, because you are talking, the other person who shall not be named, he is like Lord Voldemort, the bloke you will not name.
Yeah, why don't you want to use his name, Madam Speaker? It's very interesting. We noticed it in the interviews you do. You don't want to talk about Trump. Why is that? You don't want to say his name. Why is it?
Because I don't feel like it. I just don't feel like mentioning his name. It's sort of like a foul word to me.
Can you see that he, and we're going to move on to talk about what you do want to talk about, which is Kamala Harris. He looks really fed up at the moment, Donald Trump. He's fed up about the size of her crowds. He's fed up that the poll lead has disappeared. He's fed up about the attention she's getting.
This is a person who has no value system. The only thing he did when he was president, and they had the majority, was a tax cut that gave 83% of the benefits to the top 1%. Adding $2 trillion to the national debt. $2 trillion to the national debt. $2 trillion to the national debt. So this year, when we were waiting for the money for Ukraine, we kept asking and begging, you have to do it, we're doing it. They said, well, we can't do it until we finish the budget discussions. You know what one of the final issues of debate on the budget was? We wanted to feed the women, infant, and children. Oh, we can't do that. It's going to add to the national debt. Oh, no, we're too busy giving $2 trillion to the richest corporations and individuals in our country. So from a value standpoint, a budget should be a statement of your values, what is important to you. So they have no values, no ideas except tax cuts for the rich, That's who they are.
It's interesting, Madam Speaker, you mentioned Ukraine, and you mentioned what's happened in Congress and with funding to Ukraine. There are those in our country here in Britain, including the former Prime Minister Liz Truss, I don't know if you've seen this, who has said that she thinks, and even Boris Johnson has alluded to this as well, to the idea that the world would be safer under President Trump, that Biden has been a weak president. What would you say to that? I
say she doesn't know what she's talking about, once again. And same thing with Boris Johnson. That's what their philosophy is. You have to understand, I don't know that they're as bad as Trump is. You would be the judge of that. But because he is beyond the pale of anything. This is not like we're running, as I've said, against Bob Dole or Mitt Romney or George Bush, father or son. They're patriots. We have disagreement on the role of government, and as you have between conservative and labor and all that, and that's an appropriate disagreement to have. What is the role of government? But for them to say the world is safer under Trump, who didn't even know what NATO was, who wants to weaken NATO, who does not want to honor our mutual defense provisions of NATO. So it's annoying to hear people of some level of sophistication in public policy to use the term. If they want to be formed, that's their right. But don't say the world will be safer.
Let me ask you a question about Kamala Harris, because in your book you emphasize the why. Why is somebody doing something? What are the values that underlay what they're trying to achieve? Kamala Harris, I know what the politics is. It's optimistic. She's kind of come in. There seems to be a degree of hope, all the rest of it. But what is her why? What is she trying to do for the American people? Because in terms of policy, we haven't heard much yet.
Well, she's just been a candidate for a couple of weeks, but she has been the vice president for nearly 4 years, working with Joe Biden. Here's the thing about Kamala. I've known her for a long time. Personally, she's a person of deep faith. And that faith is what motivates her to care about people and be involved civically and politically to help people. Officially, she's very strong. She's very strong. She knows the priorities, she knows the issues, she knows the strategy. She's eloquent on them, and she talks about the two visions for America. And when you watch her campaign, you'll see that distinction that she makes in a very strong way. This is a person of faith and strength. Politically, she's very astute. So she has the talent, the stamina, the values, the vision to be a great president who happens to be a woman. So,
Madam Speaker, we've got 1 minute left on this call before we lose you. And I just want you to know, how does Kamala Harris win? Have you got what you need?
Yeah, here we go. Thanks for the question. We got the 3 M's. See, I'm a former party chair. Long time ago, that's how I was asked to run for Congress, because I was the party chair in California. The 3 M's. You must mobilize to own the ground. You must get out all of your votes. Everything else is a conversation, whether it's social media, whether it's TV, whether it's mail, it's all a conversation unless you turn out that vote of the people you have, who are your supporters or whom you have persuaded. Own.
Well, as was absolutely crushingly inevitable there, we were always going to never hear the second or third of the M's. What do you think they were? Immediate, moderate. So we'll never know. We'll never know. It'll be lost to posterity. Yeah, an extraordinary woman.
Oh, phenomenal. I mean, 84 years old, still fire burning bright. I tell you what I thought. She can't bear to name him, but doesn't stop talking about him.
Well, indeed, which is the Dems' kind of affliction all over, isn't it?
Exactly,
Yeah.
And a lot of the media's affliction as well.
Well, he's central to their voter coalition. You know, they actually, it will be really interesting. I mean, one question I wanted to ask her, but obviously we didn't get to the second or third M, so let alone going on to that, is kind of, if Trump loses in this election, is that it for him? I mean, he could run again. He could be in prison, but theoretically, who knows? I mean, we wouldn't necessarily think he'd run a third time. He could run a fourth time, or does Trumpism die with him in the Republican Party, or what happens? What happens then? And there is an interesting just sort of thought experiment to think how do the Democrats define themselves in an era where Trump is no longer there? Because he has been around now for so long. He's run in 3 cycles, not since 2012, which is basically a political eon ago.
Yeah.
Have the Democrats had to actually craft a message and a formula and a political kind of agenda to put to the electorate that doesn't involve Donald Trump? So it's a problem I'm sure they would like to have, but it would nonetheless be really interesting because, as you say, I mean, one of the things, and we didn't really get an answer out of her because I don't think there is an answer necessarily, one of the interesting things about Harris so far, and again, it's unimaginable in a British context, but she's now been the presumptive nominee for what, 3 weeks, over 3 weeks? She hasn't done a single interview. She hasn't really laid out at all any kind of policy platform at all. She has been pure vibes. My word, the vibes have been incredible.
Fantastic.
Amazing. But we have no real idea, and again, we pushed her a little bit, but we didn't get an answer as to what does a Harris administration look like.
We've kind of got hints and winks. I mean, maybe it was the case that she didn't think until very late in the day that she was going to be the nominee, and therefore just hasn't figured it all out yet.
You know what you can also see in interviews like that, and you'll have experienced this most of all, but it's that cultural difference between British interviews and American interviews, right? Like, she says there, I'm just not gonna. She does it in quite a sweet way, but like, you know, she's like, I'm just don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. You know, you're boring me, basically. You know, like I'm just not going. Which is largely unthinkable in British interviews, right? You might stonewall with British political interviewees, but they'll be more awkward about it, more difficult about it, and also likewise, you'll be more likely to really push back. And it is the difference, as you know, what between American broadcast style political interviews and British adversarial, inquisitorial style ones, which are just, and she's just not used to it. She's just not used to it.
She is used to being treated with deference.
Yeah.
And we just say, well, hang on, this was quite an important political moment.
Yeah.
We need to understand what you were doing and what you were thinking, why you did what you did.
In some ways, it's a bit outrageous that she says, well, I'm not going to, you know. Yeah. And again, we have less skin in the game with it. When you're foreign, you're interviewing an American, you always feel like, how kind of outrage can you get? Because fundamentally, it's not your affair, right? It's not your business. But like, but, you know, it's kind of outrageous for her to say that, you know, to sort of say, well, I'm not going to comment about, you know, and it's so disingenuous, right? She's like, oh, well, no, it was important that he made the decision.
Yeah,
we all know what that means, right? Everyone knows, but everyone has to go through the sort of merry dance of it. But she's a fascinating political figure, truly.
Well, we heard Nancy Pelosi there saying, Liz Truss, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Tomorrow on the podcast, in the studio with us, will be the person who was her right-hand man for a brief period of a brief tenure, Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who was fired as he came back from Washington on that ill-fated journey to the IMF.
Yeah, but it'll be a really interesting conversation because Truss and Kwarteng, who are obviously both equally associated with that disastrous premiership, have had a very different way of dealing with it and answering questions about it, as I think we'll hear tomorrow. And also, it'll be fascinating just to hear from him his reflections as someone who knows the Tory party really, really well. His reflections on what usually would be a big story this summer, which would be a Conservative Party leadership contest. But it feels so peripheral, and part of that might just be how weak the Tory party is now in terms of parliamentary numbers. It feels like it doesn't matter for a long time. But part of it is, John, it feels like it's barely got going. They still feel like they're barely even sort of stuck their head above the absolute horror, the pit of that election defeat. But it is sort of slowly getting going. So it'll be interesting to hear what he's got to say.
Yeah, well, that's on tomorrow's episode of The Newsagents. We look forward to you joining us then. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.